The silk dress felt like ice against Temperance Kincaid's skin, as she stood alone beneath the wooden arch draped with white ribbons that snapped violently in the January wind, each gust cutting through her like a blade as she realized Thomas Merchant was not coming back through those church doors. The entire congregation of Leavenworth, Kansas had fallen silent inside the small chapel behind her, their pitying stares boring holes through the frosted windows, and she knew with absolute certainty that her life as she had known it was over on this bitter morning in 1878. She had been standing there for 20 minutes, maybe 30, her bouquet of winter roses trembling in her gloved hands while the preacher had gone to search for her groom. When Reverend Patterson returned alone, his face grave and apologetic, she already knew. Thomas had left. Simply mounted his horse and ridden away, leaving behind nothing but a hastily scribbled note about how he could not go through with marrying a woman whose father had lost everything in last autumn's cattle plague. The humiliation burned hotter than any fever, but Temperance held her head high even as tears threatened to spill down her carefully powdered cheeks. "Miss Kincaid," the Reverend said softly, approaching her with slow, measured steps as if she might shatter. "Perhaps we should go inside. This cold will be the death of you." "Let them all go home," Temperance said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos raging inside her chest. "Tell them there will be no wedding today. Tell them whatever you like." She heard the church doors open behind her, the murmur of voices as people began to file out, their whispers carrying on the wind. Poor thing. Always knew that merchant boy was no good. Her father must be devastated. The Kincaids used to be so prosperous. She stood frozen, unable to turn around, unable to face the sea of sympathetic faces that would only make this nightmare more real. That was when she heard the sound of boots crunching through the frozen ground, steady and purposeful, coming from the direction of the main road rather than the church. She did not turn, could not bear to see another pitying face, but the footsteps stopped just beside her. "Seems to me," a deep, unfamiliar voice said, "that a woman as brave as you deserves better than standing out here alone." Temperance finally turned her head and found herself looking into the weathered face of a man she had never seen before in Leavenworth. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a heavy coat dusted with snow, a black hat, and a gun belt that marked him as someone who knew how to handle himself. But it was his expression that caught her off guard, not pity but something else entirely, something like respect. "I do not believe we have been introduced," she managed to say, her voice catching slightly on the last word. "Name is Harrison Wells," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Just rode into town about an hour ago, looking for work at the lumber mill. Stopped to water my horse and heard some folks talking about a wedding at the church." He paused, his eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Heard some other things, too. About a coward who ran off." "Then you know I am the object of the town's pity," Temperance said bitterly, finally lowering her bouquet. "You should probably join everyone else in their whispering." "I do not waste my time with gossip," Harrison said firmly. "But I do know something about being left behind, about people making assumptions about your worth based on circumstances beyond your control." He looked at the church, then back at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You planning to stand out here much longer? Because that dress does not look nearly warm enough, and your lips are starting to turn blue." "I cannot go back in there," Temperance admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I cannot face them all, cannot endure their sympathy and their judgment. My father is in there, probably beside himself with shame. My mother passed away 2 years ago, and this was supposed to be a new beginning for our family. Thomas promised he loved me, promised he would stand by me no matter what happened with my father's ranch. Promises are easy to make, Harrison said quietly. Keeping them is what separates decent people from cowards. Before Temperance could respond, her father emerged from the church, his face ashen and aged beyond his 52 years. Samuel Kincaid had once been one of the most successful ranchers in Leavenworth County, but the cattle plague that swept through the region had decimated his herd, and the debts had piled up faster than winter snow. He had pinned his hopes on this marriage, on Thomas Merchant's family connections helping to restore their fortunes, and now that hope lay shattered on the frozen ground. "Temperance," her father said, his voice breaking. "Come inside, daughter. Let me take you home." "Sir," Harrison said, and something in his tone made Samuel pause. "If you do not mind me speaking out of turn, I think your daughter has been through enough public spectacle for one day. What she needs now is not more people staring at her like she is some kind of curiosity. She needs someone to treat her with the dignity she deserves." Samuel looked at Harrison with confusion and a hint of suspicion. "And who might you be?" "Harrison Wells, sir. I just arrived in Leavenworth this morning, so I do not have any stake in the local gossip or politics. But I can see a woman who has been wronged, and it seems to me the best thing anyone could do right now is stand beside her instead of feeling sorry for her." Temperance felt something crack open inside her chest, a warmth spreading through the ice that had encased her heart. This stranger, this man who owed her nothing, was offering her something no one else had, not pity but solidarity, not sympathy but respect. "I will stand here with you," Harrison said, turning his attention back to Temperance, "for as long as you need. If you want everyone to see that you are not broken, that you are not going to hide away in shame, then I will stand right here beside you until you are ready to leave on your own terms." The boldness of it took her breath away. The sheer audacity of this stranger inserting himself into the worst moment of her life and offering something so simple yet so profound. She looked into his gray eyes and saw no deception, no hidden agenda, just honest conviction. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." "Maybe that is exactly why," Harrison said. "I do not know you, so I do not have any preconceived notions about who you are supposed to be or what you are supposed to do. All I see is a woman who got dealt a terrible hand today and is handling it with more grace than most people could manage. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Samuel cleared his throat, clearly uncertain about this unexpected development. "Temperance, I do not know if this is appropriate." "Father," Temperance said, finally finding her voice, "nothing about today has been appropriate. Thomas left me standing at the altar in front of the entire town. If this man wants to offer me a kindness, I see no reason to refuse it." She met Harrison's eyes again. "Though I confess I do not understand your motives." "No motive beyond doing what seems right," Harrison said simply. "I have been drifting for a while now, taking work where I can find it, trying to figure out where I belong. Maybe I am just tired of seeing good people get hurt by those who do not appreciate what they have." By now, most of the wedding guests had filed out of the church and were standing in clusters near the road, watching this strange scene unfold. Temperance could feel their eyes on her, could imagine the conversations that would dominate dinner tables all across Leavenworth tonight. But Harrison's presence beside her, solid and unwavering, made it somehow bearable. He was not trying to fix anything or make empty promises. He was simply there, and that made all the difference. "How long were you planning to stand out here?" Harrison asked after a moment, a hint of gentle humor in his voice. Temperance actually laughed, a short, almost bitter sound. "I had not thought that far ahead. I suppose until I could feel my face again, or until the humiliation killed me, whichever came first. Well, the humiliation did not kill you, which suggests you are stronger than you think, Harrison said. And I can see the church caretaker looking anxious to close up the building and go home to his own fireplace. Maybe we could take a walk instead. Let these people go home to their gossip and their warm houses while you and I just walk off some of this cold and this terrible day. It was absurd. It was completely improper. Walking through town with a strange man on what should have been her wedding day would only add fuel to the gossip fires. But Temperance found she did not care anymore. The worst had already happened. Her reputation was already in tatters. What did it matter if she spent an hour with a kind stranger who seemed to understand exactly what she needed? "Father," she said, turning to Samuel, "go home. Tell Aunt Miriam I will be back before supper. I need some time to clear my head." Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Temperance's expression must have convinced him. He nodded slowly, then fixed Harrison with a stern look. "You bring her home safely, you hear me? She has been through enough today." "You have my word, sir," Harrison said seriously. They watched Samuel rejoin the dispersing crowd, and then Harrison offered Temperance his arm. She took it, grateful for the support as her legs felt suddenly unsteady, and they began to walk away from the church, away from the site of her shattered dreams, toward the main street of Leavenworth. The town was bustling despite the cold, with freight wagons rumbling past and merchants calling out their wares. Leavenworth had grown considerably since the railroad reached it years earlier, transforming from a simple frontier outpost into a thriving commercial center. The smell of wood smoke from countless chimneys mingled with the scent of fresh bread from the bakery, and somewhere in the distance, a blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. It was the same town Temperance had known her entire life, yet it felt completely foreign now, as if she were seeing it through new eyes. "Tell me about yourself," Harrison said as they walked, his long strides adjusting to match her smaller steps. "Not about today, not about what happened. Tell me about who you are when nobody is watching." The question surprised her. "I do not know if I have thought about that in a long time," she admitted. "For the past year, I have been consumed with wedding preparations, with trying to save my father's ranch, with being the person everyone expected me to be. I think I lost track of who I actually am somewhere along the way." "That happens," Harrison said. "We get so caught up in other people's expectations that we forget we are supposed to be living our own lives." He paused as they passed the mercantile, tipping his hat to an elderly woman who stared at them with open curiosity. "I spent 5 years trying to be the son my father wanted me to be. Worked on his farm in Missouri, broke horses, tended crops, did everything he asked. But it was never enough. He had this vision of who I was supposed to be, and I could never quite fit into it." "What happened?" Temperance asked, finding herself genuinely interested despite the numbness that still gripped her heart. "He died," Harrison said simply. "Fever took him 3 winters ago, and I realized I had wasted years trying to earn approval from someone who was never going to give it. So I sold the farm, packed my things, and started moving west. I have worked as a ranch hand, a mill worker, a freight guard. Spent some time in Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska. Just kept moving, trying to figure out who Harrison Wells actually is when he is not trying to be someone else." They had reached the edge of town now, where the buildings gave way to open prairie dusted with snow. The wind was fierce here, but Temperance found she did not mind as much with Harrison beside her. His presence was like a windbreak, solid and sheltering. "Have you figured it out?" she asked. "Who you are, I mean." Getting closer, Harrison said, and she heard a smile in his voice. Today I learned that I am the kind of man who cannot walk past a woman being wronged without stopping to offer help. That is something, at least." "It is more than something," Temperance said quietly. "It is everything." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully, the frozen prairie stretching out behind them. "You could have kept riding. You could have gone straight to the lumber mill, secured your work, found a boarding house, and never given a thought to the abandoned bride at the church. But you did not." "Why?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "Honestly, I saw you standing there, holding yourself together with such dignity despite everything falling apart around you, and I thought to myself, that is a person worth knowing. That is someone with real strength, not the kind that comes from never being tested, but the kind that comes from being tested and refusing to break." Tears spilled down Temperance's cheeks then, hot against her frozen skin. Not tears of sadness or humiliation, but something else, something like relief. Someone saw her, not as a failure or an object of pity, but as a person with value and strength. "I do not feel strong," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I feel shattered. I feel like everything I thought I knew about my life, about my future, was just torn away in an instant." "That is what strength looks like," Harrison said gently. "It is not about never feeling broken. It is about standing there feeling broken and choosing to keep standing anyway." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his gloved thumb. "You are still standing, Temperance Kincaid. That counts for something." They stood there on the edge of Leavenworth as the winter wind howled around them, two people who had been strangers an hour ago, connected by a moment of profound kindness and understanding. Temperance felt something shift inside her, like ice beginning to thaw. The pain of Thomas's betrayal was still there, sharp and real, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. There was also curiosity about this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment. And beneath that, the first tentative stirrings of hope that maybe her story was not over after all. "I should probably get you back home before your father sends out a search party," Harrison said after a while, though he sounded reluctant. "But I would like to see you again if you would allow it. I know today is not exactly the best time to be thinking about such things, but I am not sure I can just walk away and never know how your story continues." "You are right that today is not the best time," Temperance said, but she found herself adding, "However, I would like to see you again too. Perhaps in a few days when the initial scandal has died down and I can think more clearly." "I will be at the lumber mill," Harrison said. "Or you can leave word for me at the boarding house on 3rd Street. That is where I will be staying, assuming they have a room available." They walked back through town together, and Temperance was aware of every eye that followed them, every whispered conversation that paused as they passed. But it did not hurt as much as she had expected. Harrison's steady presence beside her made the gossip feel less important, less capable of defining her. When they reached the modest house on the outskirts of town where Temperance lived with her father and her aunt, Harrison stopped at the gate. "Thank you for letting me walk with you," he said. "I know it probably seemed strange accepting help from a complete stranger, but I am glad you did." "I am glad too," Temperance said, "more glad than I can properly express." She hesitated, then added, "Harrison, what you did today, standing there with me, offering me dignity when everyone else was offering pity, I will not forget that. No matter what happens next, I will not forget." "Good," Harrison said simply, "because I will not forget you either, Temperance Kincaid." He tipped his hat one more time, then turned and walked back toward town, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the swirl of snow that had begun to fall. Temperance stood at the gate watching him go, her ruined wedding bouquet still clutched in her hands. When she finally went inside, She found her father sitting by the fire with her Aunt Miriam, both of them looking up anxiously as she entered. "Are you all right?" Miriam asked immediately, rushing over to help Temperance out of her frozen dress. "Who was that man?" "His name is Harrison Wells," Temperance said, "and I think he might have just saved my life." The next few days passed in a blur of awkwardness and avoidance. Temperance stayed mostly inside, unable to face the curious stares and sympathetic murmurs that would inevitably follow her around town. Her father tried to act as if nothing had happened, throwing himself into the ranch work that remained, but she could see the weight of disappointment on his shoulders. Aunt Miriam alternated between fussing over her and making dark pronouncements about Thomas Merchant's character, which Temperance appreciated even though it did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. But thoughts of Harrison kept intruding at odd moments. She would be mending a dress or preparing dinner, and suddenly she would remember the way he had looked at her, not with pity but with respect. She would recall the steadiness of his voice, the warmth of his presence beside her on that terrible morning. He had asked nothing of her, expected nothing, simply offered his support when she needed it most. It was so different from Thomas, who had always seemed to be calculating what he could gain from their relationship, weighing her value against his own ambitions. On the fourth day after the failed wedding, Temperance made a decision. She put on her warmest dress, wrapped herself in a heavy cloak, and announced to her aunt that she was going into town. "Are you sure you are ready for that?" Miriam asked, concern evident in her eyes. "People will talk." "People are already talking," Temperance said firmly. "I cannot hide in this house forever. I have my own life to live, and I refuse to let Thomas Merchant's cowardice dictate how I spend it." The walk into town felt longer than usual, but Temperance kept her head high and her steps steady. A few people called out greetings, their tones carefully neutral, and she responded politely without slowing down. The boarding house on 3rd Street was a well-maintained 2-story building with a sign advertising rooms by the week or month. Temperance had never been inside before. It would have been considered improper for an unmarried woman, but she found she cared less and less about such conventions with each passing day. The proprietor, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Crawford, raised her eyebrows when Temperance entered. "Can I help you, Miss Kincaid? I am looking for Harrison Wells," Temperance said, keeping her voice steady. "I believe he is staying here." Mrs. Crawford's expression softened slightly. "He is, though he is usually at the lumber mill this time of day. Works from sunrise to past noon most days, then comes back here for dinner." She paused, then added more gently, "I heard about what happened at your wedding, dear. That Merchant boy should be horsewhipped for what he did to you." "Thank you," Temperance said, surprised by the genuine sympathy in the woman's voice. "If I left a message for Mr. Wells, would you see that he gets it?" "Of course," Mrs. Crawford said. "Let me get you some paper." Temperance sat at the small desk in the corner of the boarding house parlor and tried to compose her thoughts. What did one say to a stranger who had shown such unexpected kindness? How did she express what his gesture had meant without sounding overly forward or desperate? In the end, she kept it simple. "Mr. Wells, thank you again for your kindness on Monday. If you are still willing to see me again, I would be grateful for the chance to speak with you. I will be at the church garden tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. Temperance Kincaid." She folded the note, gave it to Mrs. Crawford, and walked back out into the cold January air feeling both terrified and exhilarated. She had taken control of her own narrative, reached out to someone on her own terms, done something entirely for herself rather than to please others or meet expectations. It felt dangerous and liberating all at once. The next afternoon, Temperance arrived at the church garden 15 minutes early, her heart hammering in her chest. The garden was mostly dormant at this time of year, just bare branches and frozen ground, but it was quiet and relatively private. She paced along the stone path, her breath making clouds in the cold air, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. At precisely 2 o'clock, she heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Harrison walking through the garden gate. He had cleaned up since she last saw him, his hair trimmed neatly and his face freshly shaven, but there was still that same steady, honest quality in his gray eyes that had drawn her to him. "You came," Temperance said, relief flooding through her. "Did you think I would not?" Harrison asked, moving to stand near her but maintaining a respectful distance. "I said I wanted to see you again, and I meant it." "I thought maybe you had reconsidered," Temperance admitted. "Thought perhaps you realized that associating with Leavenworth's most recent scandal was not the best way to start your new life here." Harrison shook his head firmly. "I do not care about scandal or gossip. I care about people who are worth knowing, and you are definitely worth knowing, Temperance." The use of her first name sent a small thrill through her, intimate and promising. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "What you did that day, it meant more to me than I can properly express. In my darkest moment, you offered me dignity and respect, and that gift was more valuable than you can possibly know." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Harrison said gently. "I did what anyone decent should have done." "But most people did not do it," Temperance pointed out. "Most people offered pity or averted their eyes or whispered behind their hands. You were the only one who treated me like a person rather than a spectacle." They walked slowly through the garden, and gradually Temperance found herself telling Harrison things she had not told anyone else. She talked about how her relationship with Thomas had always felt slightly off, how he had been charming and attentive but never truly present, never fully committed. She admitted that she had ignored the warning signs because she felt obligated to help her father, because she had been raised to believe that a woman's duty was to marry well and support her family. She confessed that part of her was actually relieved the wedding had not happened, even though the manner of its ending had been devastating. Harrison listened without interrupting, his attention completely focused on her words. When she finally fell silent, he said quietly, "It sounds like you have been living for everyone else's expectations for a long time. What do you want, Temperance? If you could have anything, do anything, what would that look like?" It was the same question he had asked before, in a different form, and once again it caught her off guard. "I do not know," she said slowly. "I suppose I want to feel like my life belongs to me. I want to make choices based on what I want rather than what I should want. I want to wake up in the morning and feel excited about the day ahead rather than burdened by obligations." She paused, then added more quietly, "I want to be with someone who sees me as a partner rather than a prize or a burden." "Those seem like reasonable things to want," Harrison said. "And for what it is worth, I think you deserve all of them." They had circled back to the garden gate, and Temperance was reluctant to say goodbye. Being with Harrison felt easy in a way that being with Thomas never had. There was no performance required, no careful navigation of expectations or moods. She could just be herself, uncertain and hurting and hopeful all at once. "Would you like to take a walk with me next Sunday?" Harrison asked. "Not through town, but maybe out toward the river. I found a trail that goes along the water, and it is beautiful even in winter." "I would like that very much," Temperance said, her heart lifting. "Though I should warn you, the gossips will have a field day if we are seen together too often." "Let them talk," Harrison said with a slight grin. "I have learned that people who spend all their time gossiping about others generally do not have very interesting lives of their own." His expression grew more serious. "But I do not want to cause problems for you, Temperance." If spending time with me makes your life more difficult, if your father disapproves, or if it affects your reputation in ways that matter to you, then we can slow down or stop altogether." "No," Temperance said firmly. "I am tired of making decisions based on what other people think. For once in my life, I want to do something just because it makes me happy. And spending time with you makes me happy, Harrison." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, warm and genuine and full of promise. "Then I will see you Sunday afternoon," he said. 2 o'clock again." 2 o'clock, Temperance agreed. Over the next several weeks, Temperance and Harrison fell into a pattern. They would meet on Sundays after church, when the town was quiet and most people were home with their families. They explored the countryside around Leavenworth, walking along the frozen Missouri River, climbing the hills that surrounded the town, discovering hidden valleys and frozen creeks. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Harrison told her about his years drifting from place to place, always searching for something he could not quite name. Temperance shared her frustration at the limitations placed on women, the expectation that she should define her worth through marriage and motherhood rather than through her own accomplishments. "I wanted to be a teacher once," she confessed one particularly cold afternoon as they stood watching ice floes drift down the river. "Before my mother died, before my father's ranch collapsed, before Thomas came along and distracted me from my own ambitions. There is a school in town that needs teachers, but it never seemed possible. Thomas thought education for women beyond basic literacy was a waste of resources." "Thomas was an idiot," Harrison said bluntly. "You would make an excellent teacher. You have patience and intelligence, and you actually listen when people talk, which is rarer than it should be." "It is too late now," Temperance said sadly. "I would need training, and my father needs me at home to help with the house and the remaining ranch work." "It is not too late unless you decide it is," Harrison countered. "You are 22 years old, Temperance. You have your whole life ahead of you. Why should you give up on your dreams because other people need things from you?" His words planted a seed in her mind, one that grew stronger with each passing day. Why should she give up her dreams? Why should Thomas's betrayal and her father's financial troubles define the rest of her life? She began to seriously consider the possibility of pursuing teaching, of finding a way to make it work despite the obstacles. Meanwhile, her feelings for Harrison deepened with each meeting. It was not the whirlwind romance she had experienced with Thomas, all flattery and grand gestures. Instead, it was something quieter and more solid, built on genuine understanding and mutual respect. Harrison never tried to change her or mold her into someone she was not. He challenged her ideas, encouraged her ambitions, and made her laugh in ways she had forgotten were possible. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before, not as a possession or a solution to someone else's problems, but as a complete person with her own value and potential. It was mid-February when things shifted between them. They had been walking in the hills east of town, enjoying a rare warm day that hinted at the coming spring. The snow was melting in patches, revealing brown grass and the first tentative shoots of new growth. They had climbed to a high point that overlooked the entire valley. Leavenworth spread out below them like a patchwork quilt, and stood there catching their breath. "This is my favorite view in all of Kansas," Harrison said, his eyes on the distant horizon. "You can see for miles up here. Makes you realize how big the world is, how many possibilities exist beyond the narrow little corners we usually occupy." "It is beautiful," Temperance agreed. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "But I confess I am not really looking at the view." Harrison turned to look at her, his gray eyes intent. "What are you looking at?" "You," Temperance said simply. "I am looking at you, Harrison Wells, and I am thinking about how grateful I am that you rode into Leavenworth on the worst day of my life. I am thinking about how you have changed everything for me, shown me that I do not have to accept the limitations others place on me, that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I am thinking that what I feel for you is nothing like what I felt for Thomas, and that terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." Harrison closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Temperance," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been trying to give you space, trying not to rush you when you are still healing from what happened. But I need you to know that I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing at that altar, refusing to break despite everything. And every day since then, I have fallen a little harder." "Harrison," Temperance whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat through his coat. "I am falling too. I am terrified because I do not trust my own judgment anymore, but I am falling anyway, and I do not want to stop." He kissed her then, soft and careful, asking permission with every movement. Temperance melted into him, her arms sliding around his neck as the kiss deepened. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been, which had always felt performative, as if he were following a script. This was real and raw and absolutely right, 2 people connecting with complete honesty. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to ask your father's permission, take you to church socials, let everyone in Leavenworth see that you are valued and cherished. I want to give you everything you deserve." "I want that too," Temperance said. "But Harrison, you need to know that my father's financial situation has not improved. If you are courting me thinking there will be some kind of dowry or family wealth, you will be disappointed." Harrison pulled back slightly, his expression almost offended. "Temperance, I have been drifting for 3 years with nothing but what I could carry in my saddle bags. I do not care about wealth or dowries. I care about you, about who you are and who you want to become. Everything else is just details." The relief that flooded through her was almost overwhelming. Thomas had cared very much about details, about social standing and financial prospects. Harrison truly did not, and that made all the difference. That evening, Harrison accompanied Temperance home and asked to speak with her father. Samuel Kincaid received them in the small parlor, his expression cautious and slightly confused. Aunt Miriam hovered in the doorway, clearly curious about what was happening. "Sir," Harrison said, standing respectfully but confidently before Samuel, "I would like your permission to court your daughter. I know this probably seems sudden, and I know Temperance has been through a difficult time recently. But I want to be clear about my intentions. I am not looking for a quick marriage or a solution to financial problems. I am interested in Temperance herself, in getting to know her better and seeing if we can build something real together." Samuel looked at his daughter, then back at Harrison. "You are the man who stood with her at the church," he said slowly. "The one who walked her through town when she needed support." "Yes, sir," Harrison confirmed. "And you have been meeting with her regularly since then," Samuel continued. "The whole town has noticed, though most have been too polite to mention it directly to me." "We have been meeting," Temperance interjected before Harrison could respond. "And before you say anything, Father, I want you to know that I initiated it. Harrison has been nothing but respectful, and he has helped me more than anyone else to heal from what happened with Thomas. I care about him, and I want to continue seeing him." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Finally, he sighed and said, "After what Thomas did, I am not inclined to trust any man who expresses interest in my daughter. But I have seen how you have carried yourself, Mr. Wells. The people at the mill speak well of you, say you work hard and keep your word. And I have seen a change in Temperance these past weeks, a return of the spirit I thought that merchant boy had crushed. If you are responsible for that, then I suppose I owe you thanks rather than suspicion. So I have your permission, Harrison asked. You do, Samuel said. But understand this, if you hurt her the way Thomas did, there will not be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. She is my only child, and she means everything to me. I understand, sir, Harrison said seriously. And I promise you, I will never intentionally cause her pain. She deserves far better than what she has received from life so far, and I intend to spend as much time as she will allow me trying to give her that. After Harrison left that night, Temperance floated through the house in a daze of happiness. Aunt Miriam caught her arm as she passed, pulling her aside with a knowing smile. That is a good man, Miriam said. Very different from Thomas. This one sees you, really sees you. Do not let him slip away. I do not intend to, Temperance promised. The courtship progressed with a sweetness that made Temperance's heart ache in the best possible way. Harrison took her to church socials, where they danced together under the watchful eyes of the entire congregation. He brought her small gifts, not expensive trinkets but thoughtful things like books he thought she would enjoy or a sketch he had made of their favorite walking spot. He met her after his shifts at the mill, still dusty with sawdust, and they would walk through town together discussing their days. He encouraged her to pursue her teaching ambitions, even offering to help her contact the school board about training opportunities. Spring came to Kansas in a rush of green and warmth, the prairie transforming from brown and barren to lush and vibrant almost overnight. The wildflowers bloomed in profusion, painting the hills around Leavenworth in shades of yellow and purple and white. The Missouri River swelled with snowmelt, its waters rushing and turbulent, and the town itself seemed to wake from winter's slumber with renewed energy. In April, Harrison approached Samuel Kincaid again, this time with a different question. They sat together on the porch of the Kincaid house while Temperance pretended not to hover anxiously inside. "Sir, I would like to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," Harrison said directly. "I know we have not been courting for very long, but I am absolutely certain of my feelings. Temperance is the finest person I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows how valued and loved she is." Samuel rocked back in his chair, studying the younger man. "Do you have the means to support a wife? The mill pays decent wages, but it is not exactly a fortune." "I have been saving every penny I can spare," Harrison said. "I have enough to rent a small house here in town, and I am in line for a promotion to mill supervisor, which would nearly double my wages. It would not be a grand life, not at first, but we would have enough. And I am not afraid of hard work if it means building a good life with Temperance." "What does Temperance say about this?" Samuel asked. "Have you discussed marriage with her?" "Not directly," Harrison admitted. "I wanted to speak with you first to do things properly, but I believe she feels the same way I do. We have talked about the future, about what we both want from life, and those visions align in important ways." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then called into the house, "Temperance, come out here, please." Temperance emerged onto the porch, her heart hammering. She had heard every word through the open window, but she tried to look surprised as she glanced between the two men. "Mr. Wells has asked for your hand in marriage," Samuel said bluntly. "Before I give my answer, I want to hear what you think. Do you want to marry him?" Temperance looked at Harrison, at the hope and vulnerability in his gray eyes, and felt absolutely certain of her answer. "Yes," she said. "I want to marry him. I know it has not been long, and I know people will talk about me marrying so soon after being left at the altar by Thomas. But I do not care about any of that. Harrison makes me happy. He respects me and challenges me and supports my dreams. He makes me want to be braver and better. So yes, Father, I want to marry him." Samuel nodded slowly, then stood and extended his hand to Harrison. "Then you have my blessing. Take care of her, son. She is the best thing in my life." Harrison shook his hand firmly. "I will, sir. You have my word." After Samuel went back inside, Harrison turned to Temperance with a smile that could have lit up the night sky. "So," he said, his voice warm with amusement, "you were listening at the window." "Of course I was," Temperance said, laughing. "Did you really think I would sit quietly inside while you discussed my future?" "I suppose not," Harrison said, pulling her into his arms. "That would not be very much like the woman I fell in love with." He kissed her forehead, then pulled back to look seriously into her eyes. "Temperance Kincaid, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life standing beside you, supporting you, loving you the way you deserve to be loved?" "Yes," Temperance said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married on a warm Saturday in late May, in the same church where Temperance had been abandoned just 4 months earlier. This time, there was no doubt, no last-minute crisis, just two people who loved each other deeply making their vows before God and the community. Temperance wore a simple dress of pale blue rather than the elaborate white gown she had worn for her failed wedding to Thomas. She carried wildflowers picked from the prairie rather than expensive roses. And when Harrison stood beside her at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face, she felt a peace and certainty she had never experienced before. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with evident pleasure, clearly happy to see Temperance getting the wedding she deserved. The congregation was smaller this time, mostly close friends and Harrison's co-workers from the mill, but the warmth and joy in the little church were palpable. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Temperance with such tenderness and passion that several ladies in the front row actually sighed. The reception was held at the Kincaid house, a simple affair with food prepared by Aunt Miriam and several neighbors. There was no fancy cake or elaborate decorations, but there was laughter and music and genuine happiness. Samuel gave a short toast in which he admitted he had been skeptical of Harrison at first, but had come to respect and admire him deeply. Aunt Miriam embarrassed Temperance by telling stories from her childhood, and several of Harrison's co-workers from the mill made good-natured jokes about him finally settling down. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Harrison and Temperance slipped away to the small house he had rented on the north edge of town. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but Harrison had spent weeks fixing it up, repairing loose boards and painting the walls fresh white. He had even built a bookshelf for the parlor, knowing how much Temperance loved to read. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wells," Harrison said, carrying her over the threshold in the traditional manner. "Mrs. Wells," Temperance repeated, testing the name. "I think I like the sound of that." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their new bedroom, Temperance felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but simple, solid certainty. She knew Harrison would be there in the morning and the morning after that and every morning for the rest of their lives. He would stand beside her through whatever challenges came, not because he was obligated to, but because he wanted to. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, his voice drowsy in the darkness. "I am thinking about that terrible day in January," Temperance said. "Standing at that altar, feeling like my life was ending. And then you appeared, this stranger who had no reason to care, and you changed everything." You gave me back my dignity and my hope. You showed me what I deserve and what real love looks like." Harrison pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "That terrible day was the best day of my life," he said, "because it led me to you. I spent 3 years wandering, trying to figure out where I belonged, and it turns out I was supposed to end up in Leavenworth on that specific morning, just so I could meet the woman I was meant to spend my life with." "You really believe that?" Temperance asked. "That we were meant to find each other?" "I do not know if I believe in fate or destiny," Harrison said thoughtfully, "but I believe in making the most of the opportunities life gives us. And you were an opportunity I was not about to let pass by." Summer in Leavenworth was hot and humid, the air thick with the promise of thunderstorms that rolled across the prairie with dramatic regularity. Harrison continued his work at the lumber mill, coming home each evening covered in sawdust but satisfied with his labor. Temperance had finally approached the school board about teaching positions, and had been told there might be an opening in the fall if she completed a brief training program. She threw herself into preparation, reading educational theory and practicing lesson plans, excited about the prospect of finally pursuing her dream. Their small house became a haven, a place where they could be completely themselves without the weight of others' expectations or judgments. They established their own routines and traditions. Harrison would read aloud to Temperance in the evenings while she mended clothes or prepared the next day's meals. On Sundays, they would pack a picnic and ride out into the countryside, exploring new trails and simply enjoying each other's company. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from philosophical debates about the future of the West to silly arguments about whether rain smelled different in Kansas than in Missouri. In July, Samuel Kincaid fell ill with pneumonia. Despite it being summer, the disease hit him hard, and within a week he was bedridden and struggling to breathe. Temperance spent her days at her father's bedside, reading to him and trying to keep his spirits up. Harrison took time away from the mill to help manage what remained of the Kincaid ranch, tending the few remaining cattle and making sure the property did not fall into complete disrepair. One evening, as Temperance sat beside her father's bed, Samuel reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak, his breathing labored, but his eyes were clear. "I am so proud of you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You turned a terrible situation into something beautiful. You did not let Thomas's betrayal define you. You found a good man and built a good life." "Father, do not talk like that," Temperance said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to recover. The doctor said you just need rest." "We both know that is not true," Samuel said gently. "And it is all right, daughter. Your mother has been waiting for me and I am tired. But I need you to know that I have no regrets about how things turned out. Harrison is the son I never had, and you are stronger and happier than I have ever seen you. That is all a father can ask for." Samuel Kincaid died that night, peacefully in his sleep. Temperance grieved deeply, but there was also a sense of completion, a recognition that her father had lived to see her settled and happy, which had been his greatest wish. Harrison held her through the long nights of sorrow, offering no empty platitudes, just steady, unwavering support. They buried Samuel next to his wife in the Leavenworth Cemetery on a hill overlooking the town he had helped build. The funeral was well attended, a testament to how respected he had been in the community. Afterward, Temperance and Harrison had to make difficult decisions about the ranch. The debts were significant, and there was no way to maintain the property while also supporting themselves. Eventually, they sold it to a neighboring rancher for enough to pay off Samuel's creditors with a small amount left over. "Are you all right with this?" Harrison asked as they watched the new owner take possession of the land. I know this place held a lot of memories for you. It held my past, Temperance said, but you are my future. The memories will always be with me, but I do not need the land to keep them alive. She turned to look at her husband, this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment and had been her constant support ever since. Besides, we have our own home now, our own life. That is what matters. In September, Temperance began teaching at the Leavenworth schoolhouse, starting with the younger children. She loved it immediately, the challenge of shaping young minds and the satisfaction of watching comprehension dawn on a child's face when they mastered a new concept. Harrison was endlessly supportive, helping her prepare lessons and offering to build whatever supplies she needed for her classroom. One evening in late October, as autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Temperance realized her monthly courses were late. At first, she dismissed it as stress from starting her new job, but as the days passed and other symptoms appeared, she could no longer deny the possibility. She visited the town doctor, who confirmed what she had suspected. She was pregnant. Temperance carried the news home like a precious secret, unsure how Harrison would react. They had never explicitly discussed children, though they had vaguely talked about the future in terms that assumed a family. But what if he was not ready? What if this changed things between them? She waited until after supper, until they were settled in the parlor with Harrison reading a newspaper and Temperance pretending to work on her embroidery. Finally, unable to contain herself any longer, she said, "Harrison, I have something to tell you." He looked up immediately, clearly hearing the tremor in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Temperance said quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Harrison just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed his entire appearance. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Temperance to her feet and spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder evident in his voice. "Temperance, that is the best news I have ever heard in my life." "You are happy?" Temperance asked, relief flooding through her. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Harrison said, cupping her face in his hands. "I am ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic. We are going to be parents." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, discussing names and making lists of things they would need. Harrison immediately started talking about building a cradle and adding on another room to their small house. Temperance cautioned him about getting too far ahead, but she could not help being swept up in his enthusiasm. Winter came early that year, with snow falling before Thanksgiving and temperatures dropping to bitter lows. Temperance continued teaching through her pregnancy, though she knew she would have to stop once the baby came, as the school board had strict rules about married women with children holding teaching positions. It frustrated her, the expectation that motherhood would eclipse all her other ambitions, but Harrison encouraged her to keep teaching as long as she felt able. "Things are changing," he told her. "Maybe slowly, but they are changing. And if our daughter grows up seeing her mother pursuing her dreams, then she will know she can do the same." "Daughter," Temperance teased. "What makes you so sure we are having a girl?" "Just a feeling," Harrison said with a grin. "Though I will be equally happy with a son. As long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth safely, I do not care about anything else." In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Temperance went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through an entire night and into the next morning. Harrison refused to leave her side, holding her hand and offering whatever comfort he could. Aunt Miriam attended as midwife, her experience and calm demeanor helping to keep everyone focused. Finally, as dawn broke over Leavenworth, their son was born. He came into the world wailing lustily, his tiny face red and furious. Temperance held him for the first time and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of the world. This was her child, hers and Harrison's, a perfect combination of them both. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked, his voice choked with emotion as he gazed down at his son. "I was thinking Samuel," Temperance said. "After my father, Samuel Wells." "Samuel Wells," Harrison repeated, testing the name. "I think that is perfect." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel proved to be a demanding baby, waking frequently and requiring constant attention. Temperance had to give up her teaching position, though several mothers in town approached her about providing private tutoring, which she gratefully accepted. Harrison was promoted to mill supervisor, which increased their income enough to make them comfortable if not wealthy. They developed new rhythms as a family of three. Harrison would wake early to tend to Samuel before heading to the mill, giving Temperance a chance to sleep a bit longer. In the evenings, they would take turns walking the baby around the house, singing lullabies and telling stories. On Sundays, they would bundle Samuel up and take him on their traditional walks, now modified to accommodate a small child who could not yet appreciate the beauty of the Kansas prairie, but seemed content as long as his parents were near. One Sunday in late spring, nearly a year and a half after that fateful morning at the church, Temperance and Harrison returned to the place where it all began. They stood outside the little chapel, Samuel sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, and looked at the spot where Temperance had once stood in devastation. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked quietly. "The way things happened? If Thomas had not left, you would have married him and had a completely different life." Temperance looked at her husband and son, at the life they had built together through love and effort and mutual respect. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "That terrible morning was actually a gift, though I could not see it at the time. It freed me from a life that would have made me miserable. It brought you into my world. It led to this, to us, to everything that matters." She reached out and took Harrison's free hand. "You stood there with me when I needed someone most, and you have been standing with me ever since. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Harrison pulled her close, careful not to squish the baby between them, and kissed her forehead. "I will keep standing with you," he promised. "For as long as we both shall live. That is what I vowed at this church, and I intend to keep that promise." As the years passed, the Wells family grew and prospered. Temperance returned to teaching part-time once Samuel was old enough to attend school himself, and she became known as one of the finest educators in Leavenworth County. Harrison eventually became a part owner of the lumber mill, his hard work and integrity earning him the respect and trust of everyone who knew him. They had two more children, daughters they named Grace and Alina, both of whom inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's steady nature. Samuel Kincaid's land, sold years ago to pay debts, was eventually repurchased by Harrison as a surprise for Temperance on their 10th wedding anniversary. They did not move back to the ranch. Their life in town was too established for that. But they used the land for weekend retreats, teaching their children to ride and appreciate the vast Kansas prairie the way Temperance had as a child. The story of how they met became a favorite family legend, told and retold at holidays and gatherings. "Your father was my cowboy," Temperance would tell her children, "who appeared at exactly the right moment and changed everything." And Harrison would add, "Your mother was the bravest person I ever saw, standing tall when the world tried to break her. I fell in love with that strength the moment I witnessed it." On their 25th wedding anniversary, Harrison arranged for them to return to the church where their story began. It was a warm June day, and the church garden was in full bloom, a riot of color and fragrance. Their children were grown now, Samuel pursuing his own career as an engineer, Grace married to a teacher from Topeka, and Alina away at college studying medicine. Temperance and Harrison stood together beneath the old wooden arch, now repaired and repainted but still the same structure where Temperance had once stood abandoned. 25 years, Temperance marveled, looking at her husband. His hair was graying now, and lines creased his face, but his gray eyes still held the same warmth and integrity that had drawn her to him all those years ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Best 25 years of my life, Harrison said. He reached out and took her hands, the same gesture he had made when proposing all those years ago. Temperance Wells, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me a home when I was drifting, a purpose when I felt lost, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown our way. And you gave me dignity when I had none, Temperance replied, tears streaming down her face. You saw me when I felt invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I did not think I deserved to be loved. Everything good in my life flows from that terrible morning when you decided to stand beside a stranger who needed help. They renewed their vows right there in the garden, with only the flowers and the birds as witnesses. Reverend Patterson had long since retired, replaced by a younger man who knew nothing of their history, but it did not matter. This moment was just for them, a private celebration of everything they had survived and achieved together. Afterward, they walked through Leavenworth hand in hand, visiting all the places that had been significant in their courtship. The boarding house where Temperance had left that first nervous note was now a hotel. The lumber mill where Harrison had worked was much larger, employing dozens of men. The small house where they had started their married life had been sold years ago and was now home to another young family beginning their own story. As the sun set over the Missouri River, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Harrison and Temperance sat together on the same hill where he had first kissed her all those years ago. The view was unchanged, Leavenworth spread out below them, the prairie stretching endlessly beyond. Do you think things would have turned out differently if I had just kept riding that day? Harrison asked, not for the first time. It was a question he returned to occasionally, marveling at the randomness that had brought them together. Probably, Temperance said honestly. I would have gone home, eventually healed from the humiliation, maybe married someone else eventually. You would have worked at the mill for a while, then moved on to the next town, the next job, still searching for where you belonged. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. But I do not think either of us would have been as happy. I do not think we would have found what we found with each other. I think you are right, Harrison agreed. And I am grateful every single day that I did not keep riding, that I saw a woman who needed help and decided to offer it. That you were brave enough to accept help from a stranger, that we took a chance on each other when neither of us had any reason to believe it would work out. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, watching the lights of Leavenworth flicker to life one by one. After a while, Temperance said, I want to tell you something I have never said before, something I have always felt but never put into words. Harrison turned to give her his full attention, the same complete focus he had always given her. I am listening. When Thomas left me at that altar, I thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen to me, Temperance said slowly. And in that moment, it truly was awful, devastating, humiliating. But looking back now, with all these years of perspective, I can see that it was actually one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because I am glad Thomas hurt me, but because his betrayal cleared the path for something infinitely better. It freed me from a mediocre life and opened the door to an extraordinary one. She reached up to touch Harrison's face, feeling the familiar texture of his skin beneath her fingers. "You did not just save me that day, Harrison. You showed me what I was worth, and you have spent every day since proving it. You taught me that love is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about choosing each other, day after day, through the mundane and the difficult and the beautiful moments. It is about standing together no matter what life throws at you." Harrison caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I did not save you," he said firmly. "You saved yourself. I just had the privilege of standing beside you while you did it. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known, Temperance. Loving you has been the easiest and best decision I ever made." They made their way back to their house in town, the larger home they had purchased when the children were young. It was dark now, but they knew every step of the way, their feet finding the familiar paths through the town they had made their own. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, filled with photographs and memories of the life they had built together. That night, lying in bed with Harrison's arms around her, Temperance thought about the young woman she had been, standing at that frozen altar, certain her life was ending. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the pain she was feeling would eventually transform into something beautiful, that the stranger approaching her with an offer of kindness would become the great love of her life. But perhaps it was better that she had not known. Perhaps the magic of their story was in how unexpected it all was, how a moment of terrible betrayal had led to a lifetime of love and partnership. Life rarely went according to plan, Temperance had learned. The paths we expected to follow often disappeared beneath our feet, forcing us to forge new routes through unknown territory. But sometimes, if we were very lucky, those unexpected detours led us exactly where we were meant to be. Harrison stirred beside her, pulling her closer even in sleep, and Temperance smiled in the darkness. She had started that frozen morning in January 1878 as Temperance Kincaid, abandoned bride, object of pity, her future uncertain and frightening. She had ended the day as someone different, someone braver, having met a cowboy who saw her worth when she could not see it herself. And now, decades later, she was Temperance Wells, teacher, mother, wife, beloved. She had raised children who were making their own marks on the world. She had taught hundreds of students who still sent her letters thanking her for the education and encouragement she had provided. She had built a life with a man who cherished her, challenged her, and stood beside her through every joy and sorrow. The frozen altar that had once represented her greatest humiliation had become, in time, the symbol of her greatest triumph. It was where her real story had begun, where she had learned that being abandoned by someone who did not value her had actually been a blessing, because it had left her free to find someone who did. As sleep claimed her, Temperance's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. For the trials that had shaped her, for the cowboy who had offered his hand when she needed it most, for the courage to accept help and the strength to build something new from the ruins of her plans. For all the years of love and laughter and partnership that had followed that terrible, wonderful morning. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. But inside, in the warmth of their home, Temperance and Harrison Wells slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything for the past 25 years, standing together. Always standing together. That was their promise, their foundation, their truth, and it was more than enough to build a lifetime upon.